I'm Bill Pitt. I'm a former municipal commissioner in Kill Devil Hills. I've spent many years during my several terms as a commissioner in Kill Devil Hills working on beach nourishment. And I'd like to take some time, maybe 20 or 30 minutes today, and discuss with you the current project, the Northern Dare County Beach Nourishment Project for the municipalities of Duck, Kitty Hawk, and Kill Devil Hills, and discuss what's going on with that, what it looks like, and what our objectives are. If you'll take a look at the first slide up here, I'll let you get oriented with that while I sort of very quickly and very briefly go through the history and the background of beach nourishment in Dare County. Prior to 1930, before the bridges were built, actually in the late 20s, Dare County, the beaches of Dare County out here, were just flat sandbars. There were no dunes, there was no vegetation. It was, except for the maritime forests in Nags Head and Kill Devil Hills, or in Kitty Hawk. It was a free range. Hogs, cattle, chickens, whatever, raged everywhere. Anything that was green that grew in the sand was immediately eaten by the free range livestock. Many of you, if you were cottagers out on the beach, you have slats around the lower part of your cottage. That's a tradition that originated back then. Those slats originally kept the livestock, the pigs and the cattle and so forth, from getting underneath the cottages with the typical results of what happens when livestock gets under your house to get into the shade. At any rate, once the bridges were in, it made the development of the Outer Banks feasible, and naturally people started to subdivide their land and try to figure out how to do it. And the first task of being able to market that would be to build a road, and the concept was to build a road from Kitty Hawk down through to Nags Head at Whalebone, the idea being giving people a road that they could come down the beach from the Wright Memorial Bridge down to the causeway in Nags Head, running from Whalebone west towards Manteo. Several attempts were made to lay that road. This is before there were any dunes, and they were all unsuccessful because each winter the sea would come over, wipe out the road. And of course, in those days, the nor'easters basically swept water across the whole island. So the first task was to figure out how to keep the ocean from overcoming and flooding and wiping out the road. The solution to that came during the Depression in the mid-30s, in about 1932, with the development of the CCC. We brought several CCC groups in here, built camps, and they proceeded to start building dunes along the ocean front with sand fences. And because there was no vegetation, there were very few structures. The sand fence trapped sand both winter and summer. In other words, during the winter in the northeasterlies, the wind came off the beach, and started building the dunes. In the summer, the wind shifted from the southwest to the southwest, as it always does. But because there was no vegetation across the island, the sand just blew to the sand fences, and the dunes built rather rapidly. Once the dunes were built, it was possible to lay a road that would stay there. But if you think in the 50s, which was basically 30 years or so after those sand dunes had been laid, Station 6, what is now the Black Pelican in Kitty Hawk, was on the other side of the highway, roughly in the same position it is now, but just on the other side, on the beach side of the road. Then to the east of that was a baseball field where all the kids played baseball all summer long. Then on the other side of the ball field was a boathouse where the pulling boats were for the Coast Guard station. And then we had the ocean. In other words, there was still about 500 feet of beach left on the east side of Route 12 at what's today the Black Pelican. Anybody who's been to the Black Pelican lately and has looked over there on the other side of that little dune will know how much beach there is left now. Maybe 30 feet, 20 feet, I'm not sure, but it's not much more than that. In the 60s, we had the first really significant storm event that people really talk about around here, and that was the Ash Wednesday storm. It wasn't a hurricane. It was a nor'easter that, or actually several nor'easters that conjoined and hung off the coast here for several days and built a huge surge that actually topped those dunes. And Kitty Hawk and Kill Devil Hills and Nags Head all had significant flooding events up and down the coast, and it did a lot of structural damage to the buildings that had been built during the time. David Stick at that time was chair of the Dare County Board of Commissioners, and he tried to get a beach nourishment initiative started as a result of that storm and the damage that it caused. The idea was we needed to do something to get those dunes higher so that they could not be topped in another event like the Ash Wednesday storm. I had a long conversation with David early, or many years ago, when we were early on in the a later project proposal. And what David told me in that conversation, he said that the biggest problem was that landowners were absolutely unwilling to give up the easements that were required to build a re-nourished beach, and that because of that, the effort was abandoned. I don't know if that was the actual reason or not, but from David's perspective, that's what it was. From then on, the erosion continued, of course, and beginning in the late 80s, the early 90s, Dare County began with the Corps of Engineers to develop a federal project, which was to cover Nags Head, the southern portion of Nags Head that's already been done under their municipal project. Kill Devil Hills, the northern half of Kill Devil Hills, which is included in the project I'm going to brief here with you today, and a small portion of the southern end of Kitty Hawk. The rest of Kitty Hawk was not covered because the federal rules require that property, oceanfront property, must be protected and that the value of the property exceeds the cost of the project. And as you know, those of us who've driven up down the beach road in Kitty Hawk, most of the structures that were once there are gone. The cottages have been taken, and there's not a great deal of oceanfront value left to protect, and so they didn't meet the federal rules. Most of us remember how the federal project went. It was a $50 million project. It was going to put about 150 cubic yards per linear foot along that whole beach. It was going to cost the initial project about $50 million. That project was authorized. That is, the Congress authorized the project and made it an official project, but it was never, funds were never appropriated to actually get it started. And as it became more and more apparent that we were not going to get an appropriation, we started trying to figure out how to do that with local funding. And so that's where the initial additional 1% to the occupancy tax came in. We also tried and got a 1% addition to the sales tax, which was then subsequently repealed and set back. And you'll all probably remember the sand tax campaign. At any rate, that project just never got going. After the failure of that in the 2000s, Nags Head decided to try to undertake a project on their beaches because they were really having a very, very difficult time in the extreme south end of Nags Head. And that's not surprising because the erosion rate there is about 10 feet per year. And if you look, that's on the right-hand side of your of the chart that's up in front of you right now. And if you look down to the right-hand edge, you'll see the where the Nags Head project all the way down at the south end extends, well down below Whalebone. At any rate, that project was a 4.6 million cubic yards, and it cost $34 million. And Nags Head, after a great deal of work and a great deal of experimentation, put together a template that actually worked and was feasible and was politically acceptable. And Bob Oakes, who was then the mayor, was able to get everybody to agree, and that project was accomplished in 2011. And of course, we've all seen it now. We've all seen that it's working pretty well. that almost all of the sand that was put down there in 2011 is still there. And everybody is much more comfortable with beach nourishment. And based on that, Kill Devil Hills, Kitty Hawk, and Duck each began to work on, individually, incidentally, on the initial take on this, on projects to do the same thing in their beaches. In Kitty Hawk, in Kill Devil Hills, the northern end of the town, and Kitty Hawk, the entire town, and in Duck, the area up north of the Army Pier, where they've been having some troubles with beach erosion and dune erosion. Now moving to the next, this is the Duck project area. On the right-hand side of the slide, if you'll look there, that's the Army Pier, at the Corps of Engineers Pier, and this is the project relative to that pier. This is the Kitty Hawk oceanfront, and this is the entire oceanfront. Now keep in mind that Kitty Hawk has a little bit different problem than what the rest of us have. Duck and Kill Devil Hills are primarily interested in dune, beach erosion, and structure protection. Kitty Hawk has very few structures left on their beach. Now some of them are quite valuable, for example, the Hilton. But the real problem in Kitty Hawk is the ocean run-up and flooding between the highways, where the water gathers and then it's very difficult to dewater. And so we have 2, 3, 4 feet of water. It is not uncommon in areas between the highways. And some of us will also recall that that extends over the bypass, Highway 158, and has at times made that highway impassable. So their concern is, how do we keep the runoff from topping the dunes and flooding between the highways. Here's the Kill Devil Hills project, and it's the northern end of the project from the town line, or in this case, since the Kitty Hawk has got a project, it'll be from the Kitty Hawk southern end of their project down to roughly the monument is what you're looking at. These are the project specifications, and as we look at these, let me caveat this with, these are estimates. This is a work that's still in progress. There's still a great deal of discussion as to whether or not we've got really the right project, whether it's adequate in every town. And so there are adjustments being made even as I speak to you today. But if you take a look at it, it gives the total volume for each project, each town. It gives the fill density. It gives the height of the dune crest, the width of the dune crest, and the elevation of the berm, which is important in absorbing the energy of the storm or of storms. Moving along then, these are the projected cost estimates, and again, the caveat is these are estimates, and this is it's right now as currently developed, the project, about $41 million total cost. So the unit cost per cubic yard varies in each community because of the distance from that community from the borough site where the sand will be dredged offshore. And the further that the site is from the beach, the more expensive the unit cost is. The mobilization and demobilization is also a very significant fixed cost, and is one of the reasons why the three communities are joining together to do this project. Because if each community does the project on their own, those costs have to be borne each time. In other words, $4 to $5 million of mobilization and demobilization for each community project. Whereas when you combine all three projects into a single project, then you save those costs for two out of the three times, which is a very significant savings on a total cost of $40 million. These are the estimates for cost apportionment. How did we divide the costs between the municipalities themselves and between the county beach nourishment fund? And as you'll see here, the proposal right now, the municipalities will take on about 18 million, and the county will take on about 23 million of these funds. The county's objective is to use the beach nourishment fund, and by the time that the project is complete and in place, there will still be roughly a $20 million balance in that account that will be sufficient to maintain the project and the Nags Head project as time goes on. And there are also some other projects that the county is involved in that are funded from this particular account. The municipalities have the problem of how do they afford this relative to their tax bases. And the tax bases of the three municipalities are really very, very different. Kill Devil Hills has the largest tax base and of about $2 billion. Duck is about $1.5 billion. Kitty Hawk is about $1 billion. And so right away you see a problem in that the largest project, which is Kitty Hawk, has to be borne by the town with the smallest tax base, whereas the smaller projects are borne by towns with larger tax bases. And so what we tried to do was get some roughly equivalent taxation rates that have some basis in equity. That is, where a town is doing a much larger project, they should pay some more, but we shouldn't expect them to pay more than is bearable or useful. And so you'll see that, for example, we use much more county funding proportionately in Kitty Hawk than we do in Kill Devil Hills or Duck. But if you take a look at what the municipal taxes are relative to the individual tax bases, you'll see that they're really quite equitable. That's the basic rationale here. How to raise the money in the municipalities is always a big issue. And each community is going to do it differently, and each community has a different way of looking at it because their circumstances are different. Kill Devil Hills has been looking at this project for a long, long time, and so they have a pretty good idea of how they're going to do it. The oceanfront folks that are actually going to be protected in the project, that is the ocean property owners east of the beach road in the northern half of town, are going to see their taxes go up by roughly 35 cents in what's known as Municipal Service District Area 1, which is MSD means Municipal Service District. And that will roughly double their taxes for a period of about 5 years. So what does that mean? A typical house in that area is not particularly expensive for a beachfront house. It's perhaps $300,000 to $400,000 is very, very typical. So the tax increase will be about $350 per 100,000. So that's going to be roughly $1,400 a year additional town tax that they will have to pay for each of 5 years. In addition, the whole town will pay roughly 3 cents more, which will equate to a typical house in Kill Devil Hills, for example, is $225,000, $250,000, the median value of a home in Kill Devil Hills. And so it's going to be roughly $30,000 per $30 per 100,000. So it'll be roughly $75 that each property owner who's not an oceanfront owner in the project area will have to pay. That's somebody who lives west of the bypass in a typical 2,000 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, $250,000 house. They'll be paying roughly $75 more per year. That's how Kill Devil Hills is planning to do it. Kitty Hawk, since their area of protection that they're looking at is between the highways, one of the things they're looking at is making the area between the highways and perhaps even on the immediate west side of the bypass part of their municipal service district, or perhaps having more than one municipal service district and then charging a sufficient tax to cover that, and then with another tax for the entire town. I think the proportions probably would be quite similar to what Kill Devil Hills has found, because the amount they have to raise and the amounts of tax base that they're looking at are somewhat analogous. Duck is also looking at two different ways of going at it. One is a municipal service district of homes in the immediate beachfront area of the project, north of the Army Pier there, and then a town-wide tax. Another is to do two service districts, one of the immediate oceanfront homes and one of several rows back from that. But there's quite a bit of discussion in both Duck and Kitty Hawk as to how it's to be done, what's appropriate, and It's really a political decision, and there's a ways to go before that's done. But it certainly is doable, and the scenarios are viable and feasible. So that's where we are today. The county is coordinating the overall project. The county has the county and the towns meet roughly once a quarter with the engineers and the financial specialists to go over progress. And the project is moving along right now. It's in the final stages. Let's take a look at the proposed schedule. And if you can see it in the slide, there's a very fine colored line that comes down just between the third and fourth quarter of 2014. That's to indicate where we stand right now in the progress on this. And you'll see that we're sort of completing the engineering design. We're into maybe a third of the way done with our environmental documentation, and we will be shortly beginning our permitting process, which takes over a year to complete when you go through the comment periods and so forth. Pre-construction will start very shortly here in the early part of 2015, and then hopefully we'll be ready to go to bid sometime in the latter part of 2015. Bidding is part of the pre-construction process. And then you see the window for construction, which basically runs from the second quarter of 2016 through the first quarter of 2017. It won't take that long to do this project, but that window will be provided so that we can give the bidder a very wide window to look at and hopefully schedule within that will give us the very best price we can get for getting this done, because this is definitely a design to cost project. We really can't spend much more than $40 million to get it done, and if the bids come in much higher than that, then we're going to have to regroup and make some changes, downscale the project or whatever we have to do in order to get it done. Questions that always come up are really four. People want to discuss what kind of disruption does this project present for our tourists who are visiting while the project happens to be on the section of the beach where they are. A second question involves redevelopment. Can we, once we have a secure beach, can we redevelop those lots that are currently washouts? And then there's always the issue of what constitutes sand in the system? Where does the sand go when it wears? And then finally, what about environmental issues? Is that a problem here? It sure is a big problem in our bridge projects down from towards Hatteras Island. So let's take disruption first. During this window right here, which is a very wide window, and if you're involved in the tourist trade, the first thing you think is, my God, there's a whole summer where we're going to have people driving bulldozers and trucks and having big pipes on the beach, and it's not going to be fun for our tourists. Is that a problem? Well, no, it's not really. That actually takes a much shorter time than that large window. The window is there, as I mentioned, to give the contractor the broadest scheduling window possible so that we can get the lowest possible price. In other words, it makes his job of scheduling and moving things much easier because he doesn't have a real tight end date and start date. But when he moves along and gets the project going, that project moves along the beach front typically about 500 feet per day. So you spend a day hearing it as it's south of you. They typically work south to north. You spend a day with them in front of you, and yes, you are disrupted. There is a day of disruption, and then the next day you hear it because it's 500 feet north of you, and then basically that's about it. Yes, there is disruption. Is it terrible? I don't think so. It hasn't been in the projects that have been done. It wasn't in Nags Head. It wasn't in Virginia Beach. It moved along rapidly enough that there really wasn't a problem. The question of redevelopment, this always comes up, especially relative to Kitty Hawk, for example, where we have so many washouts east of the beach road. Will we be able to redevelop that when we put another 100 feet, 150 feet out in front of that with a higher dune? The answer is be careful. First of all, a lot of things would have to happen before that's really feasible. What drives the redevelopment capability of a lot really is where is the first line of vegetation, and can you meet the CAMA setbacks from that first line of vegetation? It's no different than taking a vacant lot somewhere in the south end of Kill Devil Hills and having to apply to CAMA to build there. You have to demonstrate that you're 60 feet back, your structure is going to be 60 feet back from the first line of vegetation, and that first line of vegetation has to be established. Now, when you're developing with a washout, that first line of vegetation is going to take quite a while before it reestablishes itself. There's going to be a great deal of discussion and argument as to whether the whole line should be reestablished. It eventually will be, but it's not something that's going to happen 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years after the project is complete. If the project turns out to be as stable as apparently the Nags Head project appears to be right now, perhaps in 10 years' time, it might be feasible in some places to do that. But I wouldn't want to make any promises, and I don't think that you should have any high expectations that those lots are going to be redevelopable in the immediate future. How about this issue of sand in the system? Lots of people guffaw at the concept that people like myself, who are engineers and look at these projects, and we tell you, well, the sand moves off the beach and into the immediate system, and as long as it's within the 20-foot contour, it's still within the system and it's still doing the job. The purpose of beach renourishment is not to build broad beaches. It does that, but the purpose is to absorb the energy of the ocean and prevent run-up and run-over into the developed areas behind the beach. In doing that, we lay the sand on the beach, and initially we certainly have a very wide beach, typically 100 to 150, sometimes even 200 feet. And then as the beach begins to wear, all beaches wear, the sand on the water's edge starts moving offshore. As long as that sand is within the 20-foot contour, it's still doing its job of absorbing energy, ocean energy, and that's what we're really interested in doing, in trying to protect our environment and protect our improvements. And so that's what the engineers mean when they say, yes, it's still in the system. But does that mean you can still dig holes in it, sunbathe on it, go swimming from it? No. No, you're standing on it when you're waiting, maybe. But a fair portion of it moves offshore. And that's normal, and there's nothing considered unusual in that. Finally, the environmental issues. The environmental issues are always a huge issue on anything we try to do on the wildlife refuges or on the bridges that we're trying to work on, for example, down on Pea Island or in Oregon Inlet. Is that going to be a problem for us? And I would say to you, most probably not. It certainly hasn't been a problem in Nags Head. Yes, we have to do the environmental documentation. Yes, we have to do environmental follow-up and measures, but particularly now that we've done the Nags Head project and we've seen that all of the sea life has basically come back and that there has been no permanent damage, we don't expect any problems in our project environmentally, other than going through the process, getting through the comments, and getting the documentation done, and performing the follow-up. That has to be done, and it will be done. I encourage you to call your individual municipal reps, the closest one for you. If you're in Duck or Kitty Hawk or Kill Devil Hills, feel free to call the closest one. The numbers are here up on the screen of the points of contact, and feel free to call them, and they will certainly try to get the information that you need and get it to you in a timely fashion. I'm Bill Pitt. Thank you very much.